Hello, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this important virtual event today. You've asked me to speak about supporting disabled people living and thriving with a progressive neuro condition and what we want from people just like you. So, before I start, I want to say a few things about the last 18 months. I think that every one of us is still trying to make sense of the last 2 years, which at times felt as if we had become actors in a disaster movie. I know every person in this virtual room will have been challenged to the very extremes of their personal and professional ability. I know that you've all worked to help us survive the biggest health challenge in a century. So I guess I want to begin by thanking you all for the part that you played. So, support for people with progressive disabilities like mine. What do we want? Well, firstly, I think we want to take more control over our health and medical care. This is a recent development in clinical practice. Once upon a time, our culture was dominated by Dr. Knows Best. But in recent years, many of those with a long-term neuromedical condition, like spinal muscular atrophy, motor neuron disease, multiple sclerosis, and other complex progressive conditions, have taken control of their bodies and their medical futures. At one time, we were subject to medical diagnosis and grim prognosis, and that was that. For instance, my mother was told at my diagnosis on my very first birthday to take me home and enjoy me, as I will be dead within a year. Well, I'm happy to tell you, I'm now 62 years old, and as far as I know, I'm not dead yet. Disabled people like me grew up in an era when health and social care professions predicted a life of constant care and suffering, in which only they were trained to deal with. It's taken many years and many campaigns to begin to change that culture and society's view of us in general. We needed to show that disabled people are not simply a one-dimensional product of their diagnosis. And I've actually been very lucky to be at the forefront of many of these campaigns. Many of us who were once given death sentences are now living independently in the community. We work as teachers, lawyers, artists, scientists, voluntary workers, and much, much more. Some of us raise families, we travel, and we simply get on with living. Our community have become experts in our own condition and capability. Or should I say, many of us have become experts in our own condition and capability. Others, however, are still caught within the social stereotype which often dominates our human image. We're not helped, I have to say, by the media endorsements depicting us as tragic victims or helpless in need of charity, nurses, doctors, and care. For sure, the Paralympics and other positive images in Channel 4 documentaries are now available to challenge this portrayal. But attitudinal discrimination is alive and kicking. It needs all of us to make it go away. When did you become newly diagnosed as having a neuroprogressive condition like SMA or MND? This tragic stereotype is when it is at its most dangerous. It is so difficult when progressive illness or disability or terminal illness is described in terms of dependency and loss constantly. What will always make a significant difference to how we process and deal with our diagnosis and prognosis at this point is the doctor-patient relationship. At this most vulnerable point in our lives, we desperately need the right sort of support, information, advice, and role models. This is where you come in. I was very lucky. I was transferred to St Thomas's Lane Fox unit as a young woman who had been handed what many might consider a life sentence of illness, progressive loss, and dependency. But because of the intervention made at the time, I instead went on to lead a very happy life and a very successful career. I married, I travelled, and I worked. I lived the life of somebody who was thriving, not waiting to die. So what is so different about this Lane Fox unit? After all, in the information leaflet, it's just a critical care unit specialising in respiratory support. However, it is so much more than that. So let me explain. The unit was born out of Dr. Geoffrey Spencer's vision. He was a consultant who treated people with respiratory conditions, like those with polio, many of them of whom could not survive outside of an iron lung. This cohort of severely disabled people lived apart from society, shut away in the hospitals, respite care centres, hospices, or nursing homes, written off, forgotten, and waiting to die. Dr. Spencer rejected this notion and pioneered the use of home ventilation and independent living, totally contrary to every risk assessment, but liberating and empowering to the patient. He did not do this alone, nor did he work with other medical clinicians or professionals to achieve his vision. No, instead, he learned from and celebrated disabled people's lives, his patients' lives. Dr. Spencer knew that unless he worked in equal partnership with his patients, who were far more than their diagnosis, he would get nowhere. He was one of the very first senior consultants to recognize that his patients were experts in their own situation, and that by working in partnership with them, medical diagnosis and treatment could be transformed. Over the years, the unit forged strong relationships with its ventilated patients, who called themselves the Respinals. Over the years, the unit established a patient association, which remains today, raising funds to purchase user-friendly, disability-friendly equipment for the unit and fund cutting-edge research. The most important aspect of the unit's historical culture is that the patient-doctor relationship moved from one of consultant knows best to patient might know better. Yes, patient might know better. At that time, it was unheard of. Collaboration sits at the very epicenter of the Lane Fox working environment. It was then and it remains today. Obviously, neurodoctors and other clinical professionals in this area they are the experts when it comes to diagnosis and treatments. They should be. It's their job. However, it must be remembered that the patient is or will become the expert in their personal situation, mentally, physically, emotionally, and intellectually. To achieve the best outcomes, the patient and clinician must collaborate to work out situations and solutions that achieve good health and independence with the objective of thriving, not dying. We are co-pilots in the journey of discovery of what works for us. When working together, patient health improves, but more importantly, they thrive in other aspects of their lives because they take personal control of their situation. Clinicians achieve their purpose and essentially learn from the relationship. Future patients will then benefit in turn. Satisfaction all round. It's a win-win. I'd like to give you a recent example of someone who personifies the perfect partnership between patient and professionals. For me, he epitomizes the most interesting collaboration I have ever witnessed to date between patient and the clinical profession, and very much including in that neuropalliative experts. This is a partnership where each participant went beyond their traditional comfort zone to achieve something which I think is quite miraculous. This patient's name is Peter. He would say, I'm not a patient. I'm a person with an extreme disability. I'm a person who's taken full control over my situation. So I'm going to call him the pilot. He is a scientist specializing in robotics. That is what his job and AI. That's what his day job was before he was diagnosed 3 years ago with MND, ALS, the most severe form of motor neuron disease. After his diagnosis, he consulted a top MND neurologist about his future treatment. He wrote about this first consultation in his recent autobiography. He said, I'd already outlined in my mind what I believed was needed to survive the disease. My top priority, feeding tube and ventilator pump, as well as what would be needed to lead a productive life with the disease, namely, oodles of super cool high tech. Peter wasn't prepared for the neuroconsultant's response, which was, I have to say, brutally blunt. I refuse to become involved in any of that approach. Really, said Peter? It's just that I want to be steadfastly proactive in my overall clinical care. Came the reply, it doesn't work that way. MND follows no rules. You cannot be proactive. In fact, you cannot be anything other than reactive, I'm afraid. Peter wasn't prepared for this. Peter wanted to tap into his unparalleled experience to anticipate the range of scenarios of how his condition might evolve so that he could best prepare. But all the doctor said was, after all, if we did that for you, Peter, we'd have to do it for everyone. This was an enormous blow because he was obviously not prepared to be the co-pilot in Peter's journey. 3 years on, what's happened to Peter? Well, I'm happy to say that Peter put his clever brain to work and has become what he describes to be the first human cyborg, not simply surviving, but thriving with the most severe form of MND. Peter sourced a clinical team in Torquay and persuaded them to carry out an integrated tracheostomy to allow him to continue to eat and go to the toilet in a dignified manner. Then, after 6 months of banking his voice, they performed a laryngectomy, which, like the first procedure, is not offered to people with his form of MND, or very, very rarely. The aim for Peter was to replace his failing lungs and prevent choking or pneumonia. Disappointed by existing speech technology, he contacted the innovator who designed Stephen Hawking's kit. Together, they developed a speech synthesizer program to clone Peter's voice and build a program which goes far beyond the Hawking's model. Basically, it is Peter's voice, smooth and natural. Today, Peter uses sophisticated technology to eat, breathe, and communicate in the same way as all of you in the room today, except that he is part human, part machine. I believe Peter will continue breaking new frontiers. The California-based global digital company is Peter's latest collaborator. Together, they've created an avatar, which he showcased the other day at the Hay Festival when he was interviewed by Stephen Fry about his new book, Peter 2.0. Instead of watching Peter's now MND expressionless face, the audience watched the avatar screen on his lap. Peter. Yes, it was Peter. It looked like Peter. It spoke like Peter. But it was an avatar speaking with expressions and laughter. The most exciting partnership development now is Peter's Scott Morgan Foundation, set up 2 years ago by Peter to continue to develop technology for people with extreme neurodisability. The story, or should I say Peter's story, is not one about an individual person suffering or slowly disintegrating with MND. No, it's about the future of collaborative medicine. Doctor, patient, scientist, and oodles of technology. All co-pilots are with Peter at different stages of his condition. Now that is collaborative medicine. So, in conclusion, what's my message to you today at this virtual conference? Well, I think I'm trying to say, don't just think about making the dying process a better experience. Concentrate on the individual and being your co-pilots in living every day for however long that might be, because you won't know. You won't know whether you're so-called terminally ill or progressively impaired patient is going to die next week, next month, next year, or in 10 years' time. Anything can happen. So concentrate on the individual. Constantly ask yourself the most important question of all. What will it take to enable this particular patient to thrive, to live his life or her life, thriving and living, and not stuck within the prognosis or diagnosis narrative? Survival and comfort are simply not enough. Always look beyond the medical condition and beyond the textbooks. Remember, we humans are so much more capable than our diagnostic stereotype. We have the human rights not just to live, but to thrive. Thank you all for listening.